Alright, so welcome to another episode of Your Neck of the Woods. My name is Jacob McGregor, and I'm here as always with my buddy Jason, and we're here this week to talk about something that's going on in a lot of people's neck of the woods in the city, and that's the upcoming election that you all know I'm running for in Ward 1. But today our guest is running in a different ward, Ward 11. We're glad to be here with Kourtney Branagan. Want to say
Hi.
hi, Kourtney?
Hello, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you.
Awesome, thank you. Before we get into the questions that we that I have for you, just wanted to begin. How have you found campaigning during COVID?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it is, we'll call it a bit of an adventure. It is definitely not the campaign I imagined, just over a year ago, kind of, as we entered COVID and as we thought, I believe we knew we would be in it for a while, but if a year ago, I don't think I would have said we would have been here April.
I would.
Still under restrictions. So it is different, but I think it also is an opportunity to try new things and perhaps push us um, into kind of different models of communication we might not have otherwise explored.
I was just gonna say, even like virtual outreach like this is not something. When I originally thought about running in 2019, I didn't think it would be through a lot of digital forums like this, as opposed to, and obviously the in-person stuff is gonna come. You still door knocking. We're still hopefully gonna have events, but this, like you said, has become a new way to get your message out.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? I think people are receptive. I think people are looking for it. And again, I believe there's a whole voter demographic who are online, who may not be behind a door. And it's an opportunity to connect with those voters.
Oh yeah, on I volunteer with the Conservative Party, and on average you'll get an answer to maybe 1 in 3 times you door knock, and this is maybe a way to reach a couple more of those doors you didn't get an answer. But um, getting into some deeper stuff here. You're obviously running in Ward 11. That's now a vacant seat because the incumbent, Jeromy Farkas, is gonna be trying to run for mayor. Um, he's um, gained a reputation, even in one term, as one of the more polarizing figures on council. How would you say you guys are similar, and how would you say you're different?
Yeah, I love the hard hitting one right out of the gate there, Jacob. Thanks. No. Uh, so, I mean, I don't want to kind of tippy-toe around the topic. I am one of Councillor Farkas's, critics in the ward, being in Ward 11. And I say that, recognizing where he has strengths. So I would say maybe rather than just kind of, comparing, how are we similar and how are we different, I think Councillor Farkas has done a few good things that I would hope could continue. So, for example, he's done a good job of of being consistent with town halls. I would like to see them be a bit more open and accessible. I don't, I think that's, again, here we can talk about a benefit of COVID is, being able to do live streaming so there can be more participation, more audience, more viewers. And just, again, considering, different opportunities and different days of the week, always just so you're making sure you're reaching different audiences is really important to me. And one of the things he did before town halls was he had a regular president's meeting for community associations. And that was a real fantastic opportunity to connect with each other and to get to know each other across the ward and, talk about some of our challenges, talk about some of our programming that we were doing, get ideas from each other. So that was really awesome. What I would have loved to take and see further from that is that, when we were talking about our community events, that they would have been promoted and supported through Councillor Farkas's office.
Yeah.
And so for me, that is, I think, kind of maybe, one of those differences that comes out is there are community organizations and nonprofit organizations in our city who are doing great work around community building. And when you have a stage or a platform as a counselor, I believe in using that to lift up others. I believe in using that platform to give more voice to other people and being the conduit for that.
I really like how you answered that, because even with somebody, I clearly have some places I disagree with Councillor Sutherland, or I wouldn't have thrown my hat in the ring, but it doesn't do, one, the voter, and two, the environment on council any good purely to be divisive and to, just purely point out black and white differences. Because even with people you disagree with, you're gonna admire some things that they do. So, which leads me into sort of my next question, and I think we both have a similar philosophy on this. Council seems pretty fractured in the eyes of a lot of people. How do you think we can fix that? And what do you see the role of new voices like, hopefully, yourself and myself in that process?
Yeah. Well, I'll never forget the time I was watching a council meeting and one of my daughters said, someone just needs to bring everybody cupcakes. And I thought, isn't there some truth to that? That, the sense of gathering, there is something to the sense of gathering around food, right? But what Absolutely. I think she was really getting at was also like lighten the mood, have some commonality. And, so for me, this divisiveness is, I bring up my daughter thinking, I actually have 3 young women who are watching me. And I mean, also you've got the platform of a city, right, who are watching you. And you, as a counselor, have the opportunity to be a role model. And you have an opportunity to be a leader, not just in your decisions, but in your actions. And so for me to model integrity, to model honesty, to model relationship building and trust, even across that divide, right? I say to my kids, you don't have to be friends with everybody, but you need to be kind to everybody, right? And
Absolutely.
you need to respect people for their decisions and for their stances, and to try and give them the opportunity to explain themselves. And so for me, using a position on council, one, yes, just to model to my own children, but, really keeping in mind Calgary is watching, and we can model that sort of behavior, that, that trust building to an entire city.
It's interesting you mentioned like honesty and openness in addition to getting along, because I'm hearing from a lot of people that are reaching out to me that they don't feel that the current council as it sits is being very open and or very collaborative with each other. I think again, there's obviously issues that you're gonna find common ground with people, so I'm a little puzzled when I don't see a little more effort to work as more of a team, or even in groups, so to speak, on council.
Yeah. Not to interrupt you, but yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It seems to me that there is this dichotomy, if that's the right way to put it. It just seems as though we're in this climate, and Jacob, we've talked about this, many times. We're in this climate where if you're wrong, we should discredit. Like, the belief is almost like if you're seen to be wrong, or if you're seen to not really put up a polarizing face, especially in the face of adversity, for lack of a better term, your points or your point of view seems to be discounted, or the belief is that your point of view is discounted going forward. And like you said, Jacob, it's puzzling. It's puzzling for a group of individuals who all have the same intention. We've talked about this before as well. Everyone on that council wants to see a better, thriving, growing Calgary. And so for everyone to sit on that, to be on council, and for there to be such a, I don't know, vicious might be a little aggressive, but what it seems to be less amicable and more on an enemy basis, where, nobody wants to be wrong, and, media is jumping in to kind of put in their own chime, and so everybody wants to look good in the media, and they want to look like they're really fighting, and at the end of the day, it's counterintuitive, right? Like we've talked about this, James, are we really growing Calgary if if the city council members are consistently trying to one-up each other or look better, in the other's eyes, or in the eyes of constituents in the media, right? And not to say, I'm not trying to pull a classic, Trumpian, for lack of a better term, claim of like, blame the media, fake news. That's not what this is. But I think there's some nuance and some elements there that are real, for sure.
Yeah, Jason, I think you bring up some really good points, and and again, it comes down to what's the intention of the action? Is the intention of the action to do something for Calgarians, or is the intention of action to have your name in the media? So it appears as though you're doing something for Calgarians. And so I tend to hope that we could see more of the former, in our next council, right? And that we could have people who, they can have an agenda, right? They can want to accomplish something, but that where their name should be said is within council, within administration, and that they build that team on the back end to help them achieve that, and then we present it as this thing that we, the collective of council, have done for Calgarians, as opposed to this singular ownership.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
And what's also interesting when you point out this sort of aspirational goal to have this sort of group mentality is nobody gets into this business. Nobody runs for office looking to get nothing done, even if it is self-serving. There's always a goal in mind, and those goals are more easily achieved if we work together on them, as opposed to being 15 individuals.
Yeah, and I would just say, if you don't agree with a position, or if you don't agree with a direction, it doesn't mean you have to be adversarial about it. You can step away from it. right? You can step away and say, I don't support that project, therefore I'm not going to give you my time and energy. There are different ways to say no. Um, and then it allows you then to just, rather than focusing your energy on being adversarial, you can focus your energy on finding that other thing that you want to build.
Okay,
100.
so, Jace, if you want to jump in real quick.
Just real quick, and great, great point, Courtney, and you too, Jacob. I mean, the idea of, again, when someone opposes, this is how I try and, walk around in my life. And I think that, not that I am the all wise and full of wisdom here, but I do think that council could take, a note on this, and the idea that when someone is opposing your point of view or your idea or your beliefs, I always try and do something called API, assuming positive intent. When someone is, again, quote unquote adversarial or is combative to your idea, the first thing that most people like to do is take it personally, and that is where we get into a world of trouble, where you believe that, oh, of course, if this idea came from so and so, this, they wouldn't be opposing it or what have you. But I think that if for me, if I follow that API, that, assuming positive intent, specifically when someone is, either combative or against an idea or belief of mine, I end up being able to kind of show them in a much more objective and much less personal way, where I believe I might be right in the argument or in the discussion. And 9 times out of 10, it leads to that person going, I still don't really agree, but I see where you're going there. That kind of makes sense to me. I see it. I'm still not completely on board, but I see it. And it's because it came down to the idea of, I didn't take it as, oh, this idea came from Jason, I'm done scrapping this. I don't like that guy. Maybe that's possible, but if I go in assuming positive intent and go, this is just about the idea, and let me counter back with points about the idea versus myself, I think council would move a lot further on. That was a little bit too long. That wasn't really a quick interjection, but that's what my belief is.
So, now that we've sort of dealt with some of the philosophics surrounding the environment of council and the election, let's get into some issue stuff. Courtney, I'm not gonna lie, I looked up your platform and policies when we were first looking to have you on, and it seems like you and I have a pretty similar outlook when it comes to combating, say, urban sprawl and overdevelopment. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Man, there's so much to be said on this topic, right? It could probably be a whole podcast episode, and I'm sure you and Jason will get into it. I think what it comes down to for me, around urban sprawl and urban development, there's 2 issues. One, we have climate target objectives we need to meet, both as a city and as a country. And we don't meet that by sprawling. And 2 is the other thing for me is the cost of sprawl. So I know taxes get brought up often, and we talk about lowering taxes. My approach on taxes and my approach on spending is we need to have the most, we don't need to have the most, have one of the most efficient spending of major cities in Canada. So how much do we pay per capita for fire? How much do we pay, per capita for police? But then also, how are those services in comparison to other jurisdictions? And so we should, be measuring ourselves against, Edmonton's, and the Montreals. And also, there's nothing wrong with benchmarking ourselves against other cities globally as well. And we have a favorable tax rate in Calgary. And so what I would rather see is, when we are talking about our tax dollars, let's talk about KPIs, right? Let's talk about how we measure that different than just dollars. I think we need to drill down deeper into a bit of a comparison. And so going back to sprawl strains that. sprawl strains our capacity to deliver services both efficiently and fiscally responsible. So for me, we need to put a cap on sprawl. And I think that is, to me, that is probably one of the first things that we need to do is say, what is our maximum outward limit that we are willing to accept as Calgarians? And, I have a friend, who works in development, and he will say, he's like, I work in development and I'm constantly paving farm fields. Right. So we could either make a parking lot or we could, use that money for productive income for somebody. So that's a bit on where I stand on sprawl.
See, and that's interesting because Jason can attest to this. We've talked a lot about affordability and taxes so far on the show because money matters to people. It is, in a lot of cases, issue one for somebody going to ballot box. And sprawl does affect, and I don't think some people in maybe the debates on, say, the Guidebook, flawed as it may be in the process, might have been, understand how much expanding outward makes the city more expensive to live in. But I do see your point with regards to possibly climate targets as well, even though that might not be top of mind for everybody.
Yeah, I agree that climate targets aren't going to be top of mind, and when we talk about measurements, nothing's a perfect measurement. Nothing's a perfect measurement, but I believe it needs to be part of the conversation, and I believe there are people who want to have that conversation, and so ignoring it as one of our reasons, I think, ignores a segment of the population who value that.
Well, I was just gonna say, you ignore these things completely at your own risk, just in the same way you ignore younger voters or younger candidates at your own risk because you're disenfranchising that group of people.
Yeah. And I think there will be, you both have nailed it on the head. And I think that especially in Calgary, it's a very, very difficult conversation to have with, from my experience, almost anyone talking about renewables and climate change and climate targets. And I think that, what we all have to remind ourselves of is we're not here bashing oil and gas. Like, that's not, I think that all three of us, and I hope, I would really hope that a lot of Calgarians and a lot of Canadians see that oil and gas is pretty imperative to a lot of our livelihoods. Like, we're all talking on cell phones right now. We would not have this plastic and a lot of it, the materials that go into our phones and computers without oil and gas, as general as that is. It's the truth. And so I think that, that's part, I think that, for both of you, it would be an awesome way to, start the conversation is, number one, we understand oil and gas is essential and we need it. However, I think that it's not, I think it would be, silly to not talk about the next steps and to look at the feasibility of certain technologies that are coming out. Solar panels, the technology has advanced incredibly in the last 5 years. Most notably, and everybody, and I wouldn't go as far as say everyone, but a lot of people are familiar with Elon Musk's, roof tiles, home tiles that look very similar to what we'd see on a home right now, or shingles that are able to capture the energy from the sun, So that technology is coming, and I think that what we'll see is an intersection eventually with the accessibility and the feasibility of these renewable technologies and sprawl, but we're nowhere near there yet. Do you know what I mean? We're not there in that sphere. So if you don't mind me asking, Kourtney, and this is, I'm really you on the spot, and I apologize. I know that these questions can be a little daunting for sure. I couldn't even imagine answering these, but in your mind, is the solution right now to sprawl, looking at and Jacob, I'll ask you the same question as well. You know, you can both answer. Is it looking more at high rises? Is it, you know, like I've seen in I think both of your platforms, is it improving, you know, spacing and lots and zoning in current, you know, neighborhoods? Is it maybe a combination of both? What do you guys think?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Go,
Kourtney, you
Jacob.
can go first.
All right. Well, I mean, Jason, just, you know, to your point about oil and gas, I like to reaffirm to people that I have no interest in having a steak from a solar-powered barbecue.
Love it.
That's awesome.
So, you know, Jason, I think it's all of the above. You know, I think there's land use, you know, rethinking how we use our land, you know, setbacks, lot sizes. Those are one of those things that you mentioned there. But I would say in our established neighborhoods, we have space to build. And I don't think strictly high rises. I think we continue to need a good mix of housing and of housing types. And I think it starts from looking at kind of, you know, what are the amenities proximal? So, you know, I'm over by Mayoral College. So having units that are affordable for students. So it may be 6 to, you know, 12-story apartment buildings, right, on some empty lots along 50th makes sense. There is it's basically classified light industrial. There's a lot of light industrial in Calgary, which, you know, yes, there's downtown vacancy. There's also light industrial vacancy. And so converting some of those spaces into not into apartments, but into housing. So it's repurposing some of the existing land that we have. And I think it really starts with our dead spots in our city and finding ways to bring investments into that. And that includes city-owned land. And that includes the city needing to release some of their city-owned land that they've kept, you know, just in case Parks needs it in 50 years or just in case, you know, Roads needs to build something else in 50 years. There's a lot of sites in the city that sit empty, and prioritizing those first in the established, you know, boundaries of our city before we continue to sprawl and repurposing, to me, is the best first step.
Awesome, yeah.
So
Jake,
I'll jump in now. So
yeah.
Building off of that, I would agree it's kind of silly the idea of like that densification is this bad thing purely intended to be destroying the character of neighborhoods, because it's not. It's how you grow a city. There's only so much room unless you're willing to buy land and to upgrade utilities and to make the cost of living more expensive. So we need to do that, but like Kourtney said, there's smart ways of doing that where there's space we're not using and not using effectively right now that could be utilized in a very effective way if we were more in touch with the communities and community associations, which is where I think something like the Guidebook maybe misses the mark. It's a little too prescriptive for my taste. But
totally.
In addition to that, Jace, you know, you and I have talked about maybe making sprawl slightly more expensive with changes to zoning and permits, and making that another potential revenue source as well.
Yeah, and totally, and that you know that I think is definitely part of the solution, for sure. Thank you for both your answers. I'm gonna follow up with one more hardball for both of you, and I promise I'll shut up, seriously. But I, my second question, my follow-up question is, and this is a tough one, so again, take your time if you need to, but, right now, at least from the Calgarians I've spoken to, and I'm sure you both, both of you are the same, right now, because of COVID, sprawl for a lot of people is not a terrible idea. As we're seeing in Toronto, we're seeing in Vancouver, we're seeing in Calgary even that, single detached homes out, in the, outside of the downtown core and outside of dense populous areas are going up in price. And so the question becomes, is there a sweet spot of development that will not bite us in the future where, do we focus on that because COVID might be our reality for the next year or 2 years, or who knows, where, in 5 or 6 or 7 years from now, we see a little bit of, now we have a little bit of tension and pressure because we've, gone with more of a single house, single detached homes, or do you think that a hybrid of both, if managed properly, could handle the COVID demand because of, we're so, we have to be cautious with everything going on, and staying, close to each other, or staying far away from each other, I should say. Is there a sweet spot that, do you both think that we can hit?
Definitely think that sweet spot is there because you don't want to become a big concrete jungle like Toronto, but you need to do these things and do them effectively where we're utilizing our resources properly.
Totally. Courtney, what do you think?
Yeah. So, I mean, when we look at our total land mass to density, we are, we have a lot of land, not a lot of density. So,
yes.
And it's interesting that you brought up the guidebook, and I mean, you probably know I'm an advocate for the guidebook. I think for me, the big thing that the guidebook has challenged is, I believe it's the first time a lot of people have truly considered how their communities are built. Most of us have moved into neighborhoods. We haven't been part of that building or rebuilding. Even if you buy new in the suburbs, developers don't consult with citizens before they decide how they lay out the lots. So the guidebook really flips that planning model on its head from what any of us are traditionally used to. And it's raised, it has raised concerns for people around what their sense of community is. So I think around finding that sweet spot, I think it comes in talking to people about what do they value in their neighborhood, in terms of amenity-based things. Is it the library? Is it the pathway system? Is it the pool? And then having conversations around, if we want to drill into finances, what is it going to take to support that? What do we need to support that from a financial standpoint? What kind of revenues do we need, and how are we going to get those revenues? So for me, I think there's a sweet spot, and it's been easy to grow. It's been easy to grow outward. It is not easy to rebuild inwards for many reasons. Utility infrastructure. We talk about a culture shift, right, around, how we use our land. But I think we hit that sweet spot when we continue to have conversations, and when we continue to talk about it, and when we continue to experience it. And I think and part of that is, I agree with COVID. We've become more intimate with our neighborhoods. We are more familiar with them probably than most of us have been in the last, 10 years. And what I see in my neighborhood, I mean, I'm looking out the window right now. There's a few less right now, but it was absolutely, the park was absolutely packed. And those are where connections are happening between neighbors. It's in those green spaces. So I agree, protecting our urban tree canopy Those are really vitally important things. But you don't walk up to someone at the playground and ask them what kind of house they live in, right? To decide if you're going to be a neighbor to them or not. It's really inconsequential. So.
Totally. Well, this has been Hardball with Jason. Thank you both for playing.
No, that's awesome, man. We really got deep dive into something that's a really prevalent issue right now. And Kourtney, I think you're right. This really has changed sort of how we look at our neighborhoods and how we see our city moving forward, which is that whole future vision of the city is a lot of what this next election is going to be about and what people like you and me want to help shape. We are running low on time here, so thank you for joining us tonight, Kourtney. And
I appreciate the opportunity.
And I hope to. I'm actually, before we say goodbye, I'm actually gonna be in another forum like this with Kourtney on June 7th, Conversations Among Candidates. So I'm really excited to do that.
I'm excited to have you, and I hope that you bring maybe one or two of these questions that we didn't get to answer today to that.
Absolutely. So thank you very much. Next week we're hopefully gonna have some more election talk and another candidate as a guest. So that is what's going on in your neck of the woods this week. Thank you, Kourtney and Jason.
Thanks, Kourtney.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Jacob.